I'm your producer, Todd Bartu, and this is Offshore Explorer. Offshore Explorer looks at the world from the sailor's point of view, port by port. Together, we share stories that detail the important intersections between sailing, culture, and life, past, present, and future. Let me introduce our host, a lifelong sailor who has traveled the world, raced international 14s, and crossed the Atlantic countless times. A published author who has written for both stage and screen, Sir Scott Dodgson.
Hey Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's cold, rainy. We're getting thunder and lightning here in Los Angeles, which rarely happens. How are things in your neck of the woods?
It's the same. I love it. It's rain, rain, rain. It's always one of those. It depends on where you are in the world, but when it rains and you kind of have to shut everything up, close the hatches and all the rest of it, and just lay there and listen to the rain pitter patter over the deck of the boat. It's a good sleeping thing, but it's also notorious for finding like leaks you didn't know you had. So
Yeah.
I used to have this leak that was in a hatch. I owned a 1970 Hunter. It was 42 feet. Nice boat, good sailing boat before Hunter became too over-designed and plastic and Tupperware-ish. But it was a good little sailing boat. In any case, I got it for a real great deal. I used to lay in the forepeak when it would rain and the water would just drip down through the hatch and hit me dead in the middle of the forehead. So it was kind of crazy.
Yeah. So, what do we have planned for today's episode?
Well, I thought we would just go and talk about this, that, and the other thing, and do a real recap of what we've done this last year. As many of you know, we started this process of storytelling and podcasting in March, and so we're not quite a full year, but I think we've got something like 40 episodes, it says, and so that's a lot. And but since it's the end of the year, we thought we'd just sort of recap now and sort of get into that rhythm.
Yeah, it's a good time to pause and reflect on everything that we've achieved over the past year, and to really thank everybody for listening to the show.
Yeah, I didn't know where we were really going when we first started out. I think a lot of people. In fact, I just had a text message from a friend of mine, Chris, who actually chartered my boat down in Nevis way back when, and we became very good friends. And actually, he became my agent for years when I came to Los Angeles, and it was very funny because another friend of ours had always been a bit suspicious of all my adventures and stories and stuff like that, and kind of didn't believe it. And it's just the way Ted was. He was kind of like that kind of guy, and he was over on Chris's boat, and he and Chris were talking, and I came up, my name came up, and Chris says, "Oh, I know this guy. I was on his boat." And we were in Marina del Rey, and so they called me up, and I went over to the boat, and I didn't know who was what was going on. And I walk on the boat and I see Chris, and I go, "Dude, how you doing?" Because we had spent, a good week chartering. And, we became, of course, great friends, and he became my agent. He stopped being an agent now, and he just texted me. He's in the Turks and Caicos sailing. In fact, I gave him the bug, as you would say, and off he went. And it's kind of funny because he asked me about the show, and I said, "Well, Chris, you know about the show." I said, "You've heard it before," and that's sort of where the concept of the show is of all the years that I was chartering. There's always a moment in the week, or several moments in the week, where as the captain, I would join the family or charterers or whatever the case may be, and I would just go and that was where I would tell a story. or some jokes or whatever the case may be. And people loved it, and that was a part of the experience. And I used to do that too, going back. Many people don't know who this is, but Spalding Gray is a very famous writer and monologuist in New York, and he and I used to tell stories back and forth to each other while we were standing on the street in New York, moving our girlfriends' cars back and forth across the street for the alternate side parking, and that way we could get a parking spot close to the apartments. And he lived 2 doors down from me. Anyway, I digress on that, but anybody who knows Spalding Gray knows he's got some wonderful work and is really somebody worth listening to. The original podcast person, so to speak.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's sort of where the incubus for my thought process was, making the stories like that.
Yeah, and I remember that, when we were first talking about Offshore Explorer, there was an idea of turning it into a TV show. And also you had started writing columns actually ahead of the show. And the podcast kind of took over from those columns that you were writing. And, we still have the blog going as well if you want to go back and read the old stories. What was that process like of adapting the stories first to writing to a blog, but then also to in the podcast form?
Well, it's not much of a leap, I think. As some people know, many people don't know, I've written a lot of films, and I've had quite a few. Been very lucky to have a few produced. And but I've never really done anything on the whole sailing thing, and which is a major part of my life. So I decided to write a blog about some of it. In fact, I did start writing a blog many, many, many years ago, and it's just nobody was looking at it. There was no reason to keep going, and it was more for my own good, so to speak, my own head. So, which I always tell everybody, keep a diary. No matter what you do, keep a diary, and it's very helpful for you in the long run. And I've been keeping a diary for close to 50 years, and I actually have them somewhere, all of them. But I started doing the blog just to tell the stories. And then you and I were talking, and we thought about this whole podcasting thing as we were, and many people don't know this, it's that Todd is a tremendous film producer, and he's got lots of licks out there, and he does a really, really great job. And so we kind of hit it off and started working actually on doing the show. We were looking for financing and et cetera, et cetera. And in the process of making TV shows and films, things evolve. They go ways you don't expect them to go, but the idea is to keep moving forward. So Offshore Explorer with Scott Dodgson is going to be a television show on a major network as soon as we are allowed to travel due to COVID, obviously. It's an international show, and it integrates a sort of a sailing, a view of the world through a mariner's eyes, which is very unique, which is what we're trying to get across here in the podcast. So that view, along with the blogs of writing support stories, so people could read the stories as well as listen to the stories. And it was also a place where I could write some short stories and some fiction pieces, and just keep the whole thing kind of rolling in one direction. So that it sort of evolved. It evolved all that way. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, and the podcast has actually really grown a lot, and we have a very active Facebook page as well. And we actually managed to get a couple of sponsors on board, and we're very thankful to them. We had Mustang Survival come on board as a sponsor. They have some great survival gear, and body glove. Everybody loves body glove, for their wetsuits, the shoes, the wet deck shoes, things like that. What are some of your products that you would recommend from Body Glove and Mustang Survival?
Well, obviously for Mustang survival, the first thing to do, which is I had mentioned this before in one of the podcasts, is to have your safety harness. And the safe, so that it's your life jacket. Essentially, it's easy to wear. It's not too much of a bother to be wearing it all day when you're just sitting in the cockpit. But it's a great piece of kit. It lasts a long time. I had Mustang stuff on my boat for, I don't know, 10, 12 years or something in daily use. And, just wash them with soap and water, and they all turned out just nice. They looked good. As far as body glove, is something that I always recommend to everybody is to have a dive suit available to you. I know that there's a lot of guys that think they can't fit into a dive suit, but Body Glove makes a lot of different suits with a lot of different cuts, i.e., one for your belly, and it's just good. It's good to have, and the reason I tell you it's good to have is I was in the Azores, and I had always had a dive. I was a master diver, still have the card. And I used to do dive charters on my boat. So people would go diving. I stopped doing it because it was just too much work. And my boat wasn't really designed to do dive charters. And in the Caribbean, for example, it's so much easier just to call up a dive charter company. They'll come on a boat out to your boat, wherever you're anchored, pick up your guests, take them to a dive site, feed them, have the dive go, and then bring them back in the evening. And it's like brilliant. It beats lifting heavy air tanks up out of the dinghy and onto the deck with a fairly high freeboard. So I always recommend that people have those and have a body glove or wetsuit for this reason. There's times when you're going to have to get in the water. And most of the times that you're going to get in the water, you're going to be working on something. And I would venture to say 90% of the stuff that I've had to work on is untangling something from my prop, picking up some stray fishing line, real thick, heavy, got to cut it, chop it off, and be under the water with the boat bouncing up and down. And the temperature of the water being so cold, you could get hypothermia really, really fast. So that, I think, is just kind of part of the safety equipment. I mean, I had picked up a nylon section of a nylon fishing net that was very heavy in a little harbor in the Azores in Fayal, and I had to dive on that, and the water must have been like 40 degrees, and it was crazy. Even my thickest suit that I had wasn't thick enough. I got so cold in that water so fast. So it's just a recommendation.
Yeah, definitely must have especially if you're doing long distance voyages. And if anybody is planning on buying a wetsuit or safety gear, I'll put a link in the description. If you buy anything off that, we get a little cut of it. So it's a way that you can help support us. And then in addition to the sponsors, we've had a lot of great fans and people that have been tuning in over the past year. And as part of that, I would love to maybe talk about some highlights of the year of our most popular episodes, and one of the episodes that I think really got a lot of people interested in and is kind of applicable to the weather we're currently having, and that's our Struck by Lightning episode, which was episode number 20. Do you have any I had a lot of people that were just amazed by that, and that were it was just such a fascinating story of the aftermath of struck by lightning, and people saying like, oh well, you can do this, you can do that, but at the end of the day, lightning is going to do what it wants to do,
Oh
right?
yeah, that's the bottom line. That is the whole thing in a nutshell. Is that even the insurance guys, and they don't know how lightning works. I mean, and I tell the story of being struck by lightning, and I got struck at the very top of the mast. It missed the grounding wires, and it jumped across all the rigging. And the mast, by the way, was wooden, and it actually went down the resinol where the cuts were and cooked the resinol. And because we were in a storm when it happened, it stressed the mast, and the mast cracked. And it came all the way down and jumped back in the boat. It melted my starter solid on my engine, just solid. Drained all the power out of my batteries. How that happened, I have no idea. And it destroyed a TV set that wasn't even plugged in. Is the weirdest thing in the world. And it happened instantly, and with a real clap, and a frightening clap, because you really thought somebody just blew the mast apart. And thank goodness it didn't happen. But that happened. That happened on the way to Bermuda from the Caribbean. So, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like weather is kind of a big issue, especially when you're out there sailing. And I remember you telling a story about surviving a hurricane as well. I mean, is there any other great stories about dealing with weather while sailing?
No, Todd, I don't have any. Yes. Well, I tell you, here's the one thing I want to tell everybody. This is the thing about sailors, and I'm going to address this sort of armchair sailor, or the day sailor, or the guy who's just learning, trying to screw up their courage to go out into the ocean, etc., etc., etc. Is that, look, guys? Here's the thing: any sailor worth of salt, what he's going to do is he's going to make sure he checks the weather for the day. He's going to know where the wind is coming from, the southwest or southeast or the north, whatever. He knows what the wave state's and what the sea state's going to be. And so he has his course. He knows where he's going. And if you're just beginning, and you're a beginner looking at all of this, don't assume in your mind's eye that you're going to be going through a hurricane or a great, northeaster where there's 400-foot waves and da-da-da-da-da. That's not how it works. How it works is sailors, inexperienced sailors, and even professional sailors will get caught during a passage. And that's where the weather issue becomes, how to deal with it, how to sail through it. But 95% of the time, you have a choice. It's too windy today for me. The seas are too rough for me. Fine, we're not going out today. You have that choice. And, that's the key thing about weather, is because 90% of the time you're sailing in ideal conditions, or at least nice conditions that you can deal with. And I'm not talking about just stuff that's, giant waves and 50 knot wind. Most of the people that get that kind of, or in that kind of weather, are usually doing something like going from point A to point B that they have to go. And they think they can make it through that kind of stuff. And I have certainly done that, delivering boats. But very rarely, in the Caribbean, we got caught in hurricanes just because we were there. But for the most part, I decided to just go sailing, go south, go away from the storm, and then just turn around and come back. That was always seemed to me to be the easiest thing. I've anchored during a hurricane. I've been outfoxed by hurricanes, but for the most part, I missed a bunch of hurricanes in the Caribbean by simply spending my summers in Europe.
Yeah, the best way to survive a hurricane is to avoid it.
And that's pretty much the same thing with every kind of weather, right?
Yeah.
You'll get squalls, you'll get thunderstorms, you'll get low fronts that are moving across you, and you're not going to get out of the way of them because they're too big and they're too fast, and your boat is slow. That's it. So you're going to be stuck dealing with it. But on that note, I wanted to also say something about handling a boat in a storm. A lot of people, I see a lot of people, they think they have to keep their course in a storm, even if that course is detrimental to the comfort and safety of the boat. I see a lot of people sailing into the wind, and pounding away and all the rest of this kind of stuff. You got to think that a storm over you and winds in general, on average, is not going to last for more than 18 hours. Okay? So if you're going to be, say, averaging, say, 10 knots, okay, and you take yourself out of the direction you're going, away from land, for example, which is always a good idea, because nothing sinks boats more than land, is just to keep going. Where are you going to do? 160 miles? You're going to be out of the way 120, 160 miles. I've done so many crossings and had so many storms that I would just find a comfortable spot to sail in. Okay, use the strong winds to keep up a good speed. Kind of keep in the general direction. If I was going from the Caribbean and to Europe, and I was traveling east, I'm just looking to go generally east. Okay? And in 18 hours, how far am I going to be off course in 18 hours? Not very far, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, but the people panic and they think, oh, I got to keep this course. I got to go on this course. No, you don't. Your boat is your boat. Your boat is your place. And that's just take it where it's most comfortable. And that's how you avoid a lot of problems. A lot of problems. So.
Yeah, absolutely. The next episode I want to talk about is, for me, it's kind of an interesting story. And this was an episode that we weren't actually planning to do. We were planning to do something else that week. And for whatever reason, I was thinking, you had told me this story, and I thought, this would make a great episode. So I said, you know what? Why don't we do this other episode instead? And we put it together really quickly at the last minute, and it's actually became one of our most popular episodes, and that was the story of the mutiny.
Oh, yeah. We love mutinies. Mutinies are so much fun. They just possible. In fact, I just saw another story about a couple that was having a problem with some of their crewmates, and very strangely, the story was fairly similar to the whole concept, and it's kind of interesting. But that story, just to sort of back up, that story is about drinking and having a ting sting and being at the Four Seasons in Nevis, and which, by the way, I opened up talking about my friend Chris, who's sailing in the Turks and Caicos right now. I met Chris at Nevis. That's where I met him. So that was it's funny you should bring that up. But in any case, it's sort of like this conflict that you have on a boat between the organization of the boat and the authority that the captain has. And some people just don't like the authority. We've had a lot of listeners, check it out and listen to it, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So I really appreciate that.
What is it about boat that causes that kind of conflict? Is it just being in a small space with the same people over and over again, or like what is it that leads to that conflict? Because it seems like a lot of times it comes out of nowhere and you're not expecting it at all. You know?
Yeah, it's kind of like for me, it's like the lack of Zen.
Mm.
As crazy as that sounds, people get on boats and they have different expectations. People are on boats for so many different reasons, and I think I addressed it in our Christmas episode, with Christmas at the bitter end, and the idea of why people put to sea, and what it is that they bring to the whole thing, and some people can't handle the structure, and then some people have this expectation that their freedom should allow them to do whatever they want to do. And there's some very competitive, narcissistic, sociopathic people that you find wandering the oceans these days. But I've always tried to find somebody who was just kind.
Yeah.
And because kind people always work out just fine.
And I would imagine that sailing and yachting and that whole world kind of tends to attract individualistic type of people, the people who don't want to go into an office every day, you know?
Yeah, and there's something, and that reminds me of something, and I might have to go off on a different tangent here. Is we've been offering, and I've been offering, and a perspective on sailing, and a lot of our listeners who are, we have a lot of listeners in the United States, Canada, Australia, New England, New Zealand, South Africa. We have tremendous listenership in Asia and in India. South Asia, and as well as really all over the world. But one of the things that and that you have to understand is that the whole yachting, sailing world, et cetera, isn't just European white guys out sailing. Okay, in India, it's vastly different. For example, tons of marinas in Italy or in India. Tons of marinas, lots of sailors, okay? The same in Indonesia, Singapore, okay? It's not exclusively this sort of Western culture look. I drove a boat for a guy who was from Indonesia, all right? And he was Muslim, so he had a little prayer room in the boat, okay? And then when he went to do his prayers, I had to orient the boat in the direction. Actually, we did it east to west, and then he would orient his prayer rug to that. So I think it's a mistake for most Americans to just assume that it's sort of yachting and sailing and all the rest of this stuff is just some sort of New England white guy thing. Okay, there's lots of different people that are out sailing, and in different cultures, and they have different views. It's a completely different society, but it's really bound tightly by the experience of being on the ocean and sailing.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the next episode that was one of our most popular ones, and the story behind this episode I think is kind of interesting because this was an instance when, we put it out there in the first couple of days, it's kind of doing okay. And then all of a sudden we had a huge spike, and we saw that, like, for some reason or other, it had caught fire and caught imagination, especially on social media. And a lot of people were really talking about it. And that was about the history of the rudder.
Oh, yeah, the rudder. A very interesting thing, and I think we got a lot of feedback. We got some negative feedback, and I'll be the first to share that. Yeah, there was. I had a couple of people that sort of misunderstood what I said in terms of the rudder. I had talked about the boats being somewhat flat bottomed, and one of the reasons they were flat bottomed was so that they could come up to the shore. And I think I said that they could kind of stick them in the mud and offload stuff. And that was wrong. And actually, the person who criticized me for that, I did actually send him a note and say, yeah, I had misspoke. I didn't really mean it that way. That the development of the rudder, which was huge in the exploration of the world, without that kind of control surface, these boats, which were not designed with large, deep keels. They were designed basically to go into shallow places to carry goods, large number of goods, and that's sort of what the design was. And the design, I think we had a picture of the rudder for the Constitution, and there you begin to see like the V hull kind of concept coming about on boats. Especially sailboats. It made them. They gave them the ability to sail close to the wind, which kind of a flat bottom boat with a small rudder couldn't do. And so they developed that concept, and it was a sort of a military concept for fighting, etc. And that is kind of leads us into the other show that was really popular and continues to be very popular, the Bermuda sloop, which is actually one of my favorite topics. I just love those boats. And I just posted a couple of pictures of the original kinds of sloops that are out there. And that whole idea is that's the kind of boat that most quote-unquote pirates and privateers, that's what they sailed. I mean, yeah, we have the old, English ship of war, line ship, which the pirates got their hands on in like 1652 in that area. But the development of the faster sloop who could approach closer to the wind, could escape faster, could fight quicker, could avoid destruction because they were so nimble, and they still could carry a large number of crew members and fighters to board another ship, which was convenient for, jumping on a mercantile ship, which didn't have a lot of people fighting. But we were very pleased that whole rudder thing, that it was a great episode. I'm planning on doing some more boat parts next year, and some designs. I have some designers that I'll be talking with, and we'll be just talking in general about and some specific stuff about where sailboating is going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think like we've done a couple of episodes just about the history of sailing and boats, and like the history of navigation. We did an episode about that. That was really popular. Just protocol. That was also very popular. The idea of checking in. There's definitely a popular type of episode that deals with history and boat construction and boat parts and all that. But another part of the show over the past year is we've had some interesting guests on the show. And, everyone from, Steve with his photography, and
Steve Lapkin.
We had David Rigsby to talk about poetry in the sea. We had Rita Garcia talking about, Portugal and how the sailing industry is being affected there. But the most popular of all and of course we had Tommy Twang, which we cannot forget, who does all the music for the show. Tommy's a great character. I'd love to have him back on the show. But But one of the most popular interviews that we had was Tim B at Sea. And I think he kind of
That's right.
represents a kind of a different aspect of the boating world, which is more like the workaday, the workers, the tugboat, the people who drive the boats day by day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was Tim was great. We'll have Tim back next year as well, and he's doing great. If you all go to YouTube, you'll see Tim B at Sea. He does lots of videos from his tugboat and he's mostly kind of in New York Harbor, but he goes out. He was in Groton, Connecticut, I think, last week, or he's in Puerto Rico, one of the two. But he's a really interesting guy, and we had a lot of fun because, I had run tugboats way back when, and it was just sort of nice to. As a friend of mine said, it just sounded like two old tugboat captains chewing the fat. So that was a great interview, and we enjoyed it. And we had a lot of people look at that.
Yeah, no, he's a great YouTube channel
cool.
to go check out. And before we get to our most popular episode of the past year, just to leave you guys in suspense, we had a lot of fans and people that have supported us along the way. I did want to give a shout out to a couple of the other podcasts. I would say check out the Shooting the Breeze Sailing podcast. Those guys have been great. How Not to Sail, great podcast. Just generally, I think that the community of sailors and people in the podcasting world have been very supportive. Is there anybody else you would want to thank for their support?
No. Yes. Just kidding. Yeah, of course. My dear wife, she puts up with a lot of stuff, and if you all don't know who that is, it's Paulette McWilliams. She's a very famous jazz singer. We produced a new album this year called A Woman's Story, which, by the way, is doing great. It's charting all over the place. And hopefully next year we'll all be on the road and we'll all be cooking with gas. So,
yeah, and I got to see her perform at the LACMA. They do the little jazz thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think during the summer, is it every Saturday night they do jazz, or they did do jazz.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the LACMA is the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. And it's not like a county art place. It's a L.A. county art place. And it's phenomenal. It's a great space. It's a huge space. It's very well endowed space. And it's really L.A. But we do an outdoor concert there. And she gets invited every other year. They don't do you every year. It's kind of every other year, every 2 years. It depends.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. And she did a living room performance, I think.
That we did one at Scullers for all you Connecticut folks up there. She did a living room concert at Scullers. She will get booked she's going to be booked at Scullers as soon as we're able to get traveling and COVID. She'll be on tour, and her record, A Woman's Story, Paulette McWilliams, is everywhere you buy your music. So download it, listen to it. It's very cool.
And anything else you want to add before we move on to
the number one?
The number one, which
the number one.
If you're listening to this, see if you can guess. I'll give you a couple of seconds just to think about what is the thing that all sellers think about. And that would be
yes, and it's not your jib.
Yeah. Yes, and it is Sex and Sailing, which was extremely popular from the beginning, and and sex is obviously a large part of the whole sailing mythos. You have people drinking and hooking up on a boat, and there's definitely a large aspect of that to the sailing and boating world.
Yes, and there is a thing, and the thing is that when you're on a boat, and we had, by the way, most of our comments came from women. We had an unbelievable number of comments come from women, and the comments were basically this: been there, done that, best years of my life.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums up this whole thing, because when you're on the boat and you're moving, and I try to describe this in detail in the podcast, is that there's a kind of sexual awakening. There's a sexual thing that is going on. And this is, warm weather, warm water. It's sensuous. It's, tactily interesting and fun. And, you get the right person with you, and it's a great joy to have great fun. And I'm looking forward to this coming year, because I'm going to revisit the subject in maybe a different way. And talk about how it all works, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's our big one.
Yeah,
yep.
It also ties into some of the other episodes that we've done. We did an episode about food on a boat, because I think that also kind of ties into that the sensory nature of being on a boat. You're eating this amazing Michelin star quality food, drinking this amazing wine on a boat, the amazing sunset, some tropical island. I mean, what's not to love?
Exactly. And we talk about food. I talk about food, in a lot of different places. All throughout the 42 episodes, I mentioned food or talk about food. From the food in Greece, and eating the shrimp in Greece roads. No, what are we talking about? Eating the simi shrimp.
Yeah.
Simi shrimp. Yeah, French fries with eyes. That's where I was at before I couldn't find the name for simi. But that's we talk about that. And talk about I've talked about food in Italy and going to the famous ancient market, which is very close. This is walking distance from the marina. And, fishing, catching fish, cooking fish, lots of, different kinds of things on how to preserve food, what to eat, and all of that, that kind of craziness. But we're going to continue doing more about cooking. And for my Louisiana friends, we are doing a gumbo for our New Year's Eve. We're going out. We're going to pick up the fresh fish in a couple of days, and we're going to be making some good Louisiana gumbo.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to do an episode about New Orleans and Louisiana area. There's so much there in the Texas Gulf area in terms of food and drink and all that.
Tremendous sailing area. We're going to be doing some stuff on the Mississippi. And, one of the things that's kind of kept us, sort of California bound, even though we've allowed our imaginations to take us around the world. And there's so many other places that I would love to, that I'm going to talk about, sailing in Vietnam, sailing in Thailand, being in Australia and sailing in Australia, the whole Pacific. I haven't really done much in that, and I will get to doing that part of the world this coming year. But one of the main things we're doing is we are going to be doing a couple of television shows, and they're all, of course, going to be related to sailing. And so we're going to have much more opportunity to travel now that the COVID-19 thing has some sort of light at the end of the tunnel, although I think it's still a fairly long tunnel, with the vaccine and all the rest of that. But hopefully by summer we'll be able to move about and bring you much more variety and some, present tense, interesting stories and discoveries. And I really hope to go down to Louisiana and do the whole Delta, Mississippi, and do that kind of area down there. So there's a lot of great stories there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to go out and start filming again. And if you're listening to this, and if there's anything you would like to see or hear more of, definitely let us know. We're very active on our Facebook page and on Instagram, Twitter, all the social media. Maybe one of these days we'll get around to doing a TikTok or something. I don't know. But yeah, so that's it. Is there any other things as we wrap out this episode and wrap out the year?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening and for investing their precious time into our little world of stories and sailing and seeing the world in the mariner's eyes. We thank you, and we hope to keep growing and continue and bring you more interesting perspectives from the world of a sailor.
Great. Thanks. Happy New Year's, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to rate and review. You can find us on Facebook and at offshoreexplorer.org. You can also listen to past episodes at offshore-explorer.simplecast.com. Our theme song is sung by Paulette McWilliams, with additional music by Amanu Itomi and Tommy Twang.
Until next time, fair winds and calm seas.